Good morning. I am so glad to see all of you here this morning. It is a beautiful day and a great start to our week. And I'm very excited to have this opportunity to speak this morning. I always love whenever these pop up, and it always means that my grandpa's gone, but it always means that I get to speak a little bit, so it's a win for me. They are actually, I believe, in Branson, and he is speaking on a lectureship right now, but I'm sure they are doing great. So this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about love. And we're going to look first in Matthew 22, verses 36 through 40, a passage that we often go through whenever we're talking about love. Matthew chapter 22, starting in verse 36 and going through verse 40, says, "Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the laws and the prophets." Another verse I want to look at is Ephesians 5, verses 28 and 29. I'm getting married in a little bit under a month, and so I've been thinking and looking at what does it mean to be a husband. And this verse really brings to the forefront what part of being a husband is. Here it says in verse 28, "So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church." Both of these verses talk about loving others, about how we're supposed to love others, and so often we go to these verses and say, love your neighbor, love your spouse. But too often we overlook the end of this verse. Both of these verses say, love thy neighbor as thyself. Love thy wife as your own body. And to have this kind of love, we have to have self-love. Because if I can't truly love myself, I can never love someone else in the way that God wanted me to. There's a reason that he says, love others as yourself. Because we have that innate care, and so often we think this is such an easy thing to do. I love myself. That's an easy topic. That's something easy to do, but we've all struggled with it. There's been times where you haven't been able to love yourself, and you haven't done those things that are loving and showing love to yourself. Before we really embark on this lesson, I want to point out and make it clear that this isn't selfishness. This is something different. I'm not telling you here to be selfish and only think about yourself. But I am telling you that to have that proper love that God wants us to have to each other, we must first be able to love ourselves. And this is a proper and godly self-love that we're discussing. And this morning, before we even start, we've got to define what is self-love. What is love just in general? And this morning, this is the definition that we're going to work with. To me, the definition of self-love is doing what is best for yourself. Choosing actions that are in your own best interest. And that's, again, not being selfish, but it's putting yourself in the right situations, making sure that yourself is right before you do anything else. And whenever we compare this definition of love, I think it matches up perfectly with what we see in 1 Corinthians 13. And now, whenever we think about this definition of love, it makes complete sense whenever we're talking about loving someone else. So often, whenever we say, do you love this person? Well, yes, I love them. I put their needs and their wants above anything else. But too often, we're not willing to do that for ourselves. We put ourselves and we make decisions that don't benefit us and put us in the right godly situations. And so we really want to focus in on that self-love and honing it in to make sure that we have it right. Now, I'm a really big quote guy. I love quotes. Song lyrics, quotes, whatever it is, I love it. And I love to bring lessons out of those. I see those quotes and I see those song lyrics and I see deeper meaning in them. Something that they say connects to our Christian living. And this morning's quote comes from a really odd place. It comes from Will Smith. And Will Smith did a video of inspiration about self-love and self-discipline, and he said in the video, self-discipline is the definition of self-love. And I heard this, and it blew me away. And it really resonated with me. We have to be willing to discipline ourselves to truly love ourselves. As a parent, you love your kids, but you have to discipline them. That's how you show your love. You have their best interest in mind, and so you discipline them whenever they're not doing what's best for them. And as Christians, we have to have that self-discipline for self-love. And just like any good quote, this quote has a lot of biblical backing. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. We're going to look at different examples throughout the Bible of self-love and people showing self-love. But before we get to that, I just want us to think physically for a second, to really grasp this idea of what is self-discipline as self-love. And so one of the major examples that I can think of is whenever we go on a diet. If you're on a diet and you're sitting there and you see some ice cream, you're like, ooh, that looks good. And you tell yourself, you say, I know that ice cream looks good, but I love you too much to let you eat that and ruin your diet. You love yourself enough to forego a moment of pleasure and a moment of enjoying that ice cream because you see the long-term goal of that diet. Another example that I can think of is whenever we have to get up early, either for work, for church, for whatever it is. So often we're like, man, I got to get up in the morning. I really just want to stay out a little bit later. I want to hang out with my friends just a little bit later. I just want to watch one more episode on Netflix, which always turns into one more season. And you tell yourself, I know you really want to watch that next episode on Netflix. I know you really want to stay out late tonight, but I love you too much to let you ruin getting prepared for church in the morning to watch that episode. See, we discipline ourselves to truly love ourselves. And these things are so much harder than they seem at times. I mean, for the diet example, it's so difficult to pass up ice cream anytime I see it, which I don't. I always eat the ice cream. But we have to have the ability to discipline ourselves to really show that love. And it's not thinking about what instant gratification will bring to us. It's thinking about on the long term, what will we receive? What will be better for us? What is the proper choice that will be in our best interest? And so our first biblical example is Joseph. I don't know if you know this about me, but Joseph is my absolute favorite example in the Bible. I'm pretty sure any lesson I give, I somehow tie back into Joseph. And this morning we're going to look in Genesis 39, verses 7 through 12, and it's the account of Potiphar's wife. And I think there's so many wonderful things that we can learn from this account and from this young man and what he does. Starting in verse 7 of Genesis 39, it says, And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me, but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her, or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in his hands, and he fled and got him out. Joseph was in a tough situation here. Honestly, Joseph had the power to, if he had sinned, he could have made it completely unknown. He was the head of the house. But Joseph loved himself too much to let him do that. Joseph looked at himself and he said, I know that she wants to lie with you, And I know you could probably get away with it, but I love you too much to let you jeopardize your relationship with God for this moment of pleasure. He looks at it, and his love for himself is based in God. He knows that the mistake that he would make would jeopardize his relationship with God, and he says it's not worth it. I love you too much to let you make that mistake and not have your relationship with God. Even though in the short term Joseph suffered, he was thrown in jail for something that he did not do, in the long run, Joseph was bettered by this decision. He made the choice that was in his best interest. Our next example is Daniel. In Daniel 6, we're going to be reading there, we see the account of Daniel in the lion's den. And so we don't have the time to read this entire chapter this morning, but it all kind of plays in part together. And at the beginning of the chapter, we see that Daniel is basically second in charge to the king. To King Darius, he's second in charge, and he's over everything. And the other people that rule underneath him became jealous. They were jealous of the power that Daniel had, so they began to plot against him. And they said, we can't find anything wrong with him. There's no dirt on his back for us to get him out. So we've got to trap him. We're going to trap him, and that's how we'll get him. And so we're going to be beginning and reading in verse 6 of Daniel 6. It says, "Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom and the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any other god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being opened in his chamber towards Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime." And then, as you continue reading, they come and they find him praying, and they bring him to King Darius, and they say, he was praying to another god, you have to cast him in the lion's den. They've trapped him. And Daniel here was faced with a decision. Daniel could have just not prayed for 30 days. He could have went into a closet, or he could have hid it a little bit so that they couldn't see him doing it. But Daniel loved himself too much to allow him to do that. And he looks at himself and he says, I know it would be easier, Daniel, to just fit in and just to protect your life. But I love you too much to let you jeopardize your relationship with God so that you can fit in here on earth. And Daniel knew what had been signed. He knew what was coming. He knew that he was going to be cast into a lion's den, and he didn't know whether he would survive. He didn't know whether God would deliver him. But he said to himself, I love you too much. Saving your life on earth isn't worth jeopardizing an eternity with God in heaven. So in the short term, Daniel put himself in trouble. But over the long term, that choice was in his best interest. Our third example is Peter and John in Acts 4. Here, Peter and John in the previous chapter had healed a lame man, and it was an amazing miracle, and everybody was amazed by it. And the Sadducees took him to the council, and they said, these men have done a miracle, and you need to discipline them. And they brought him to him, and they spoke to the council, and then we're going to begin reading in verse 16. In verse 16, the council is dismissed, and they're discussing what they're going to do with Peter and John, and it says, saying, What shall we do to these men? For that indeed a notable miracle hath been done by them, is manifest to all them that dwell in Jerusalem. And we cannot deny it. But that it spread no further among the people, let us straitly threaten them, that they speak henceforth to no man in this name. And they called them and commanded them to not speak at all, nor teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said unto them, Whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. For we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. So when they had further threatened them, they let them go, finding nothing how they might punish them. Because of the people, for all men glorified God for that which was done. Now Peter and John are taken into the council and they're threatened. We don't know what those threats were, but I've learned that whenever you're threatened, it's never a good thing. These men were going to probably do some terrible things to these Christians, as was typical of the time. And they were threatened. They told him, don't speak in Jesus Christ's name anymore. Don't preach about Jesus anymore. Don't spread this word. And Peter and John had a decision to make. And they had to look at themselves, and they told themselves, I know it would be easier just to say you won't speak, than go on your way and avoid the trouble. But I love you too much to reject God here and jeopardize your relationship with Him. It's not worth this moment of pleasure to avoid temporary pain, to risk eternal pain. And these men made another decision that was so difficult. A decision that wasn't easy because they were putting themselves in harm's way, but it was in their best interest in the long run. Now our fourth example is Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate example of everything. He showed us the way in all of our life and how we should live. And that holds true in this idea too. We're going to look in Matthew 4. We're going to read the first 11 verses. In Matthew 4, Jesus is being tempted. Starting in verse 1, it says, Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward a-hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command these stones to be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on the pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down. For it is written, He shall give His angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again the devil taketh him into an exceedingly high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world, the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give unto thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and Him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. 3 different times Jesus was tempted by the devil. 3 different times he had chances to succumb to those temptations. And 3 different times he loved himself too much to allow him to do that. The first time, he's tempted with bread. And Jesus is obviously extremely hungry. And he looks at himself and he says, I know you are very hungry. You've been fasting for 40 days, and you could easily turn those stones into bread. But I love you too much to let you jeopardize your purity and the plan of salvation to do this. Then the second time, he's basically challenged to let the angels catch him whenever he falls. And the second time, Jesus tells himself, I know that you can do this, and you can prove the devil wrong easily, but I love you too much to let you ruin your relationship with your Father for such a small thing. Then the third time, Jesus thinks, I know you could rule all of this, I know you could physically be the king of all this land, but I love you too much to jeopardize your spot on the right hand of the Father in eternal paradise for this earthly kingdom. And Jesus, each time he's tempted, has enough self-love to overcome those things and not succumb to those temptations that face him for that instant gratification that would have followed. Now our final example is self. So often whenever we look at biblical examples, we forget that we're supposed to be an example of the believers. We can be that example to the entire world. And we've seen it throughout the Bible, so that means that we can do it. In 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, it says, "There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it." There is always a way out of temptation. No matter what comes in front of you, there is a way out of that temptation. You must be disciplined enough to find it. So the next time that you're confronted with a temptation and you are standing up against that temptation, have enough self-love to overcome it. Look at yourself and tell yourself, even if it's out loud, just to get yourself on that right path, say, I know that you could have fun right now. Plug in whatever temptation that you're struggling with. But I love you too much to jeopardize an eternity in heaven for this one moment of pleasure. In Hebrews it says that Moses would rather suffer affliction for God than to enjoy a season of sin. And we need to be the same way. We need to look at ourselves and say, I love you too much to let you enjoy this one moment of pleasure, this one moment on earth, and ruin an eternity with God the Father. And it's not going to be easy. It never is going to be easy. There's going to be times that you're going to struggle because you're going to want to do it so bad, but you have to stick to your self-discipline. And you have to not move away from what you know is true. I guarantee you that those biblical examples struggled with those temptations. If they didn't struggle with it, then it really wasn't a temptation. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. But we must look ourselves in the mirror and say, you know what? I love you too much to do whatever you want to do right now and jeopardize that relationship you have with your Heavenly Father and that chance that you have of eternal paradise. Because it's not worth it to enjoy right now and suffer for eternity. And maybe this morning you've succumbed to that temptation. You've let sin creep into your life and you haven't had that proper self-love to discipline yourself and not let it come in. Or maybe this morning you're just struggling with something. You're struggling against a temptation and you just need help of others to make it through. You need someone to be there to help you carry that load. Or maybe this morning you haven't made that ultimate decision of self-love. To tell yourself, I know that this life in sin, I know that this life of ease in the world is easy. But I love you too much to let you continue in the world and not receive that eternal paradise. If you're struggling with any of these things, or if you're ready to make that decision to be baptized and to put away the things of the world and become a Christian, I have one question that I want to close with for all of us. Am I showing a proper self-love? Next time that you're faced with temptations, ask yourself, am I showing a proper self-love? If there are any needs of the congregation, please come forward.